Okay, SaferTech NZ, excuse me, is a North Shore-based group that began nearly 4 years ago. It was inspired by the work of Catherine Smith, whom you may know, the editor of the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine, and David Holden, a North Shore naturopath, medical scientist who couldn't make it tonight. And we knew we had to do something about the increasing amount of electromagnetic radiation in our environment and the cell tower invasion. Towers going up everywhere around the country, rurally, and in our cities and towns. So we became SaferTech NZ, and our little byline is maximizing safety, minimizing harm. Primarily, we're focused on the wireless technology, but we will consider other harmful technologies. But lately, we've got a lot on our plate with just handling the wireless. Our program tonight is going to feature 3 excellent speakers. And before I begin, I want to remind you that I don't need to, do I, to turn off your mobile phones? While you're at it, you can throw them away, but anyway, that's the next step. And we have a display table on the back, which has quite a bit of information that you may wish to photograph or take away. And there is a sign-up sheet if you'd like to stay connected to the network, the database of what we're doing. Because we're in a new phase. Now, when our group started out, we did mostly research, and we sent a lot of letters to ministers, government agencies, and met the usual stone walls and the denials. We dealt with the ombudsman, we dealt with local authorities. We realized we had to get back to the people. So the research and the formalities shifted into public meetings like this one and public actions. So on our website, if you go to www.safertechnz.co.nz, there's business cards back there, there is an actions category, and under that category you can see what we've been up to. Currently, our focus has been taken over by what's happened in Devonport. If you haven't been aware, you're probably not if you're not living in Takapuna or Devonport, the company called 1NZ, I don't know why, they're Vodafone, they are planning to install 8 new 5G arrays, cabinets, in residential streets across the street or often in front of someone's home without consultation, in many cases without notification. And so we've gone to work with a big public meeting last month, over 80 people in attendance, and started to, begin the stirring and the awakening that needs to happen for change. Now, there's 2 areas we focus on, not only the technology, but also the democratic process. If you go into any issue, whether it's fluoride, glyphosate, 1080, 5G, if you go down enough, deep enough, and just make the connections, you'll see that it's all interconnected. We feel that 5G is probably the most urgent because it is literally a connector. It is using all the frequencies that are running through us and around us all the time, 24/7. That is our main focus. But we also are focusing on the democratic process. Why are our elected authorities and the bureaucracy continuing to ignore the evidence, the good science that's been around for decades, and why are they not listening to the citizens who are concerned, and many of us affected vibrationally, biologically, by this technology? So twofold, human rights, the democratic process, and the actual technology. So tonight, our first speaker, Dr. Robin Kelly, will focus on some of the biological issues around this technology. Then Alexey Yachin will take that further regarding the hypersensitivity that people experience when they're exposed to this radiation. And then Michael Vaughan will speak about the effects on children, our young people, our future. And there'll be time for a Q&A, both after Robin speaks and also toward the end, after Mike and Alex will have quite a bit of time to have some concerns and questions from you. We want this to be very interactive. Any questions before we begin? Wow, okay. You will have some later. Can I welcome Robin? Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I was going to walk around, but I need to be on shot, I think. Put that horrible thing down, but I won't. Hi, I'm Robin Kelly. I've been a family doctor, since 1981 on the North Shore. And one of the strange things I did straight away was starting to do acupuncture because I found it worked. And I found people felt better straight away, and I didn't have to prescribe so many drugs. And as I've progressed with acupuncture, I decided to investigate why on earth this thing works. And I discovered a whole world of what they call biophysics rather than biochemistry. Now, most doctors are trained in biochemistry. You go in, you get a pill, you're a bunch of chemicals, you're a meat package, basically. I found that when I did acupuncture, whatever I was doing, most people felt, that's funny, I feel more at one with the world afterwards. I just feel a bit more connected, I feel a bit lighter. And I began to look into this. I studied Chinese medicine, and I wrote a few books over the next 20 years. And I think what happens with acupuncture, you put a little antennae into the body, and that connects with the natural world, the natural frequencies. And we know that the natural frequencies are what we call the Schumann resonances. And they're very low frequency, big waves, something like 7 to 10 or even 12 hertz. And it dawned on me that that's what I was doing. I actually wrote a book, and I'm promoting that half, called The Human Antenna, because I decided that when we were doing this, people became more connected with their environment. So when this whole debate about the environment that we have, with the electrical environment that's been developed over the last 20, 30, 40 years, and so I became concerned because it looked like we were tapping into wavelengths that were far different from what our natural processes depended on. Not just us, it's plants and bees and animals. So I became a bit concerned. So I started to look into this. And this was about 5 years ago. I thought, well, what is happening? Why are we allowing this? And I discovered over 2,000 papers raising, these are scientific research papers, raising real concerns about what was happening out there that wasn't natural for us. Most of those involved the fact that these millimeter waves or higher frequency waves did affect what happens on the cell membrane. It alters the cell membrane and allows, this is just one consistent view, a lot of calcium going into the cell. And the end result of that is we have what we call oxidative stress and free radicals. And those free radicals and oxidative stress contribute to so much ill health, our immune system's dysfunction with those. That's why we take when we talk antioxidants like vitamin C, we need vitamin C. And I discovered there were 2,000 papers plus concerned about this. And what does this lead to? This leads to effect on our immune system, indirect effect on the DNA. I also discovered that this is even before 5G came on. This is 3G and 4G. These were all before 5G came on. Concerns about, there was a big $25 million study from the National Institutes of Health in the US. I think it was about 2011, this was about that anyway, that correlated normal cell phone usage on rats. Not many rats use cell phones, but it showed there was an increase of certain tumours, particularly something called schwannoma, which were tumours of the heart. We actually get schwannomas in our heads, and they're called acoustic neuromas, and brain tumours. And it was significant. And I wondered why on earth this hadn't shocked so many doctors and others into saying that we need to up the safety level of these processes, I suppose. Then I realized that, in fact, all they're interested in, and that's the authorities, and something called ICNIRP, which is the world authority on this, was that we don't harm the body by heating it. And in fact, what's happening is all these effects are occurring below the safety levels that have been imposed on us by these authorities. So I started looking at who these authorities are, and they're basically all industry people. There are very few scientists or biologists or doctors involved. Now, I have to say I'm a doctor. I don't think there are many doctors here because most doctors don't know anything about this. So if you go to your doctor, they are interested in your biochemistry, not interested in your physics. So then I also discovered there were many papers on male fertility, reducing male fertility, and even a very worrying paper, a set of papers on rats where it showed that the fertility of unborn fetuses was affected, female fetuses, that may well affect their fertility in the next generation. They study rats because they produce a lot, and therefore they become very quickly pregnant over a few weeks, and so they can study them quite quickly on future generations. So that got me somewhat alarmed about 5 years ago. And then I also discovered papers that the Department of Defense and the military and the DARPA in the United States have known about this since the 70s or so, because they've known that the Russians have known about this for a long time, and Russians have known that these millimeter waves, which Alexei will explain, thank heavens, are dangerous. In fact, you know, there was a whole so the military have known that that the higher frequency millimeter waves that we're talking about with 5G and 4G are potentially dangerous for the body, can be a weapon. And a lot of that work has been declassified, and I presented it at the last meeting, where I did a slideshow, but I didn't talk from the heart so much as that I'm doing today. Then the third thing that really concerned me was those who criticize this, say, wait a minute, 5G, initially all I'm talking about is all 4G and 3G. All 5G does is affect and penetrate 1 millimeter of the skin, as if that is not important. This is despite the fact that we know that that the sun creates us vitamin D in us that actually protects us from so much inflammatory condition. We need the sun. Also, anybody who knows anything about skin cancer is it develops in the very superficial layers of the skin. In fact, we measure the effect of melanoma to initially how deep it is up until 1 millimeter. So anybody who thinks that the skin and the millimeter of the skin is not important doesn't know any medicine at all. Also, then I became concerned on another level, is that we know that our skin also contains lots of beneficial bacteria called the microbiome. We probably know the bowel contains microbiome, but also the skin. And we're fooling around with nature in a way that those people in charge have no concept for, and are paid to have no concept about at all. And there are papers to show that we are increasing the resistance we have to bacteria, and particularly E. coli. And why is that important? That is because many women suffer from urinary tract infections. And unless we can treat them early, they can go into kidney infections. Unless that's treated, that goes into kidney failure. So all those who have simple urinary tract infections could be advanced to kidney disease, which is potentially very serious, potentially terminal, but certainly also can lead to surgery. So I'm just touching on where my concerns are. I'd have to say that there are many in charge of the future of our health that sees the future of our health, all our health and future generations, lie in such things as mRNA technology, in gene splicing, and in information gathering. I take a different point of view because I feel that, in my practice anyway, I'm dealing with deep distress, complex trauma, of which this is adding on to their complex trauma, and problems that are to do with the environment and nutrition and other things. But there's no money in that. There's no money in that. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to be very happy to answer questions. And I'm very happy to, answer any questions. Are there any naysayers here? Are there any? Because I'm quite happy with that. If anybody says it's challenging what I'm saying, I'm only too happy to.
Robin, in your practice, are you seeing individuals who are definitely affected by this electromagnetic radiation?
Yeah, I think, and Alexei will talk about this, is that you.
Me?
Yes. I've discovered during my 40 years, when you do things like acupuncture, you discover that there's many, many types of sensitivity, from those who are extremely sensitive. They're nice people. They often suffer of chronic fatigue because they absorb so much, and they're chemically sensitive and they're electrically sensitive, to those who have sort of rhino hides. Okay. And I see less of them, but when I go do my, there are. So the absolute is yes, I do see them. And it's terribly difficult because it's all around us. It's hidden and it's around us. And most of them are gaslighted. And I do struggle. I know there are gizmos to try and prevent this happening. But we need to actually get to it at its source. So it is a real issue. And Alexei would explain, because I know Alexei has personal experience of this. And the evidence is that it is similar to people who have had brain injuries in the past, have actually had trauma to their brain. And there are actually studies that show that there are similar mechanisms at place. It is real. When I talked to Alexei, by mistake, I said, look, you're lucky because you can feel it. So many people, I think, are even less lucky because they don't know what's going on. They're not sensitive to it. The sensitive people are creative people, brilliant people, often. And so it's actually my concern is those who are absorbing this, who are unknowing about this. If in fact it was the heat, because they use these millimeter waves for crowd prevention, as you know, to sort of fire this at people and people will recoil. Okay. If we actually had that, and that sensitivity, we'd know to duck, but we can't particularly. So it is real. I think my bigger concern is what it's doing to us, and particularly the next generation. And we know that children are even more affected by this and more sensitive. Their skulls are thinner and their systems are more open and creative. Any other questions?
Does the identifiable level of harm start with 3G, 4G, or even earlier?
I think it's been accumulative. Yeah, it's been cumulative. And 5G being these waves, minimum waves that carry so much information in a small amount of waves, don't travel so far, but it's the icing on top of an electrosmog that's already there. That's how I see it. So I think that all those thousands of papers that have been concerned about it have been on the 3G and 4G and 2G or whatever, and I call the original G. And this new stuff is on this top. We also know that if you go higher and higher, it resonates over the sweat glands, which have water in them as well. So we may be opening the door to more. This is speculative, but doctors in the past used to have this thing called the Hippocratic Oath, where they said, first do no harm. And if you suspect something's going on, just protect people. And that's been somewhat challenged in the last few years. Up until 3 years ago, I had no cell phone. I have to admit, I've got a dumb phone at the moment, okay, I have to say. And as I tell my grandchildren, smart people have dumb phones. And because the opposite could occur. It's difficult as a doctor not to be communicated with. And I think we have to realize once we have smartphones, we are part of this network. And I'm sure Alexei will say these things are being, the 5G is now focusing and beamforming and pulsating towards people who have phones within their home too. So there are a lot of those. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you know any natural remedies that can mitigate somebody who is sensitive to electro pollution?
I know of some. I've been a bit disappointed over the years. Certainly vitamin C, anything that's an antioxidant is really important. And maybe, if you take vitamin C, melatonin is an antioxidant. I mean, there are a lot of other gizmos that I'm not sure about. I haven't been totally, protectors, magnetic protectors and other things. Maybe Alexei will know more. But I've tended to feel that in medicine we should avoid rather than counteract. Bottom line I'll say, but is the people that are in charge of this are incredibly, this is money. This is hugely money. We talk about the pharmaceutical, big pharma, big tech, big pharma all together. And they don't really care a bit about whether this is dangerous or not. This is the thing, as long as they make the money out of it. And you've got universities, you've got the parts of medicine that are focusing on this, seeing the future is going to be 5G, which carries all the information, allowing them to do all this AI stuff. It's really that deep. I think my concern, I think the way around it as a group like this is actually people, because we're talking about humanity. And I think there's one thing that a group like this can start. So I think I'd love it to start organically, so other groups can come to the party. For me to argue this on a scientific level against all those closed ears and all that money is very difficult. So I don't know. You may be able to, from your own experience, have some idea of some preventative measures that you have.
So the best preventative measure for this is avoidance. For that, distance is your friend, time is your enemy. There are other things, studies have shown melatonin can help mitigate the oxidative stresses effects and also combats the symptom that you get of insomnia. And vitamin C, like Dr. Kelly said, but the best thing is to reduce your exposure. That's the only thing that works. There are other things for people who are sensitive. Ginkgo biloba has been, in one paper, has shown that it might help the cognitive effects with memory, just help the circulation in the brain, but it's not it's sort of like if you're in an oven, yeah, you can put burn cream on and then go back in the oven, and then it's good to have burn cream, but it's better to be out of the oven and not getting burnt in the first place.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm taking up a bit. Yeah, I'm okay. Any other questions?
Yeah. Hi, it's about phone use, and someone else can answer it. I haven't had Wi-Fi at home for years. I refuse to have Wi-Fi at home just for visual censoring and other things that can do. I also have Bluetooth on my phone on. I always have that turned off. I'm aware that that's going to be part of the Internet of Bodies day soon. But I use mobile data and I have it turned off at night. So this mic's cutting in and out. So I need a new phone. It needs to be a bit smarter than your dumb one, just my work things. And just wondering what people's recommendations are.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
I
Yeah,
don't
for a
know.
new phone, because I do email off my phone when I'm out and about for work and things like that, and I've tried finding one recently and they're all 5G, blah, blah. I want to just stick to a...
I've got to ask Alexei, am I fooling myself that with a dumb phone that I'm any better off?
Not sure.
Not sure, good. Nor am I.
Probably it doesn't have Wi-Fi, doesn't have mobile data as much.
No, this is basically for texting, which I learned to do 3 years ago, and phones, and phoning. But I don't think it does QR codes or whatever like that. It has got some other gizmos, which I'm not interested. So,
It's hard to get when you need to get a new phone and you still need email and things, but not 5G. It's getting harder to find one.
yeah,
Can I add a little?
yeah.
To add a little point, I see a lot of people with earphones. I see a lot of people with that wireless headphones. And I asked my friend who's got one, why? He said, all new phones, they don't have a jack for it. And then he went on to argue that it's better, it's not enough, there's not enough space and all this other gibberish. But now with newer phones, you do not get the option of having a wired headphones or
It's all good.
yeah, it's all Bluetooth. So
Can you get adapters that go into your town plug?
you probably can, but it would be much better if they just kept the little audio jack.
Yeah.
Question, Robin. When we were researching this issue, researching about EHS,
Yeah, I can hear you.
we found there were only several countries in the world that recognized it as a medical condition.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's often said, oh, it's psychosomatic. It's something else. It's neurasthenia. It's this or that.
Yeah.
Where are we at in New Zealand with recognizing this as a medical condition?
Well, I recognise it, but in fact, if you go to your doctor, they're looking at their computer, and their computer tells them there's no information at all. They go, the software you press on conditions, it hasn't got EHS on it, hasn't got lots of other things as well. So I think we're appalling at it, really. There are probably a few of us. There are doctors who focus on environmental health. There's a network of probably about 20 of us in New Zealand who do get it and will be very comfortable. But we're a drop in the ocean, I'm afraid. It has to come from the people. It has to come from the people. We battle our own profession in this way, and the people who are so-called leading it, from the universities to our council and everything, basically have no idea about this. I'm sorry, I can't say any more. They really don't. You guys are better informed now. They will be. I have given these talks to doctors' groups as well, but usually the people that come along are sort of small groups who are aware of it. It's got to come from the people. Don't rely on the doctors, I'm afraid. I think I must pass it out. Thank you. Bless you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. There'll be some time at the end for more questions. Some things will come up as you hear the other speakers. I'd like to welcome Alexei from behind the console, and his background in science and as an electrical engineer. He'll explain more about that, and his firsthand experience with dealing with this electromagnetic phenomenon in our environment. Welcome.
Hello, my name's Alexei. I'm just going to give you a brief overview so you know what to expect. So the first part will talk about health effects, EHS. Personally, I was affected. Also general effects. And we'll also go through a bit of scientific literature, but we'll do it very quickly. We'll rush through it. I just want to give you an answer, your question about what is dangerous that will help answer it. Then we'll go into New Zealand's situation in specific. So the New Zealand standards and also measurements, past and present, to give you an idea of how things have changed over time and what it looks like now. And then at the end, there'll be a live demo on dirty electricity, a lot of people are afraid of cell towers for good reason, but they don't realize there's other sources in their home that are even closer to them that can also generate electromagnetic radiation that's quite harmful. So who am I? I'm a mechatronics engineer, and I've got experience in data acquisition, analysis and processing. Also a keen sportsman. I love judo and balance sports. I also love science, but I'm electrosensitive. And my first experience was in my last year of uni. It was in 2016. I started getting headaches, insomnia. I was very difficult to concentrate, and my memory started to go. I had fatigue, depression and anxiety. My academics dropped from A+ to C's, and I had to split up my course over 2 years just to finish my degree. And at the time, I wasn't sure what was going on. I went to doctors for about 8 years trying to find the cause, looking for every little thing that it could be, and each one of the leads didn't lead to anywhere, and no fixes. When there was a little bit more talk about 5G, being a very analytical person, I don't like to watch a YouTube video and go, that YouTube video says that, it must be that. I like to look into the nitty-gritty of it. And I decided to look into it, into 5G, but I couldn't find anything on 5G. I did find quite a bit of research, though, on all the other Gs and radio waves and electric fields, and it goes back from the 60s, where as early as the 60s, these effects were being found. Some groups that have, that if you wish to look into it into more detail, are ones like Bioinitiative Report, Environmental Health Trust, the Building Biologists Institute. They actually mitigate EMF for homes and incorporate it into their building standards. European, it's not the wrong spelling of European, it stands for European Academy of Environmental Medicine. They've done a lot of work in terms of diagnosing people, and we're trying to bring some of their work into New Zealand. So what was really surprising when I started finding this literature was the symptoms that were described in these papers, written on the other side of the world, were the exact symptoms I've been experiencing. Not just one or two, but quite a few of them. So at one point I went on I decided to test the theory. I went on to electrical detox at my friend's place. I house sat when they went on their honeymoon. So I turned off all the circuit breakers for the part of the house where I was sleeping. I turned off Wi-Fi, kept the electronic uses to a minimum. Symptoms improved. Sleep was the first one that went really well. I started to sleep through the night, easy to fall asleep, slept through the night, woke up in the morning feeling refreshed. Headaches subsided to a very bare minimum. I couldn't even... We can feel our hand. Well, I mean, you don't feel your hand right now if it's not hurting. If it's something tingly, you feel it, but, it's not bothersome. It was sort of like that. I could feel my head. You shouldn't normally feel your head. It's just there. I could feel it, but it wasn't bothersome. When I went back and got re-exposed, that's when I really felt the contrast and very strong headaches within half an hour of being re-exposed. So from that point on, I was like, I'm onto something. So there's a lot of sources of this information, but EMR is very insidious, and there's three reasons why it is hard to identify. One is there's no public knowledge of EMR hazards. It's not talked about in the public, it's not in the news, it's not featured in textbooks. If people aren't aware of this information, how would the idea pop into their head? The second one is it's a gradual build-up. It's not an on-off switch. Now this applies to both symptoms and both to our environment. For symptoms, it's not straight away you turn on a Wi-Fi router, ow, that thing's hurting me. It's more of a half an hour later, you might get a slight tinge After about 2 hours, it might get worse. After 5 days, you'll start getting fatigue. And after years of build-up of exposure, it's not a straight on-off, it's not you bump your knee and your knee hurts. It's very, very gradual. It's like a slow poisoning. But the other thing of the gradual build-up is our environment has very, very slowly been increasing its level. And because of this, the level increases a little bit, people get used to it. They think, this is the new normal level, it's fine. Levels increase again, oh, feeling not so well, but you get used to it, levels increase again, and it's very gradual build-up. And also, it's hard to find an EMR-free environment. If there was more environments like this, then people will be able to tell the contrast. For me, I could only tell after I had that really good test of contrast. But because most places now are saturated, you go from one place to another and you don't feel the difference because it's all the same. Those are the three reasons why it's very insidious and very hard to find. It's like a frog in a microwave oven. So on to human vulnerability. About 1 to 10% of the population are electro-hypersensitive. So about the best estimate is about 1% are very severe. It's debilitating for them. But more interesting, about 10 to 30% are electrosensitive. They get some symptoms, but it doesn't really interfere with their life so much. But this is interesting because that is quite a significant figure. That's quite a would be very good to look at the Amish because they are probably the last control group, and to see how their health is compared to the average health of people living in electrified societies. But 100% of people are still susceptible to the long-term effects, not the symptomatic effects, but the long-term effects. And we'll cover that in a second. So for EHS, these are the common symptoms. I'll pause on this slide just so everyone can have a read, and I'll read them out. So headaches, fatigue, concentration and brain fog, memory problems, sleep disturbances, depression, anxiety, tinnitus, which is like a very high pitch ringing in the ears, skin problems, joint pain, and flu-like symptoms. If anyone recognizes any of these symptoms in themselves, I highly recommend having a look at your electronic devices and how they can be used safer. With the general health effects, Rob and Kelly already covered most of these, but there's a huge range of them that take a long time to develop. So neurological effects, cardiac effects, why is the heart affected by electricity? Everyone knows if you want to jumpstart a heart, you give it an electric shock, or if you get electric shock, your heart can stop. It's got a lot of these things called voltage-gated calcium channels, and so is your brain. And EMF has an effect of, it forces them open, so calcium doesn't channel properly. It floods the cell, and you get a type of poisoning. So your heart and your brain are very susceptible because of the high concentration of these specific channels in them. So that leads on to calcium efflux, which we just talked about. The endocrine system, so that's hormone system, that can be disrupted. Fertility problems. Now, oxidative stresses, the easiest way to think about it is premature aging. Nearly all aging diseases are to do with oxidative stresses. And if you have what EMF does is it produces a lot of oxidative stresses into your body, and then that can have that can cause DNA damage and other stresses on your body. And then cancers. Diabetes is an interesting one. There needs to be more research into this. However, there's already some studies that have shown biomarkers increase with that, with more exposure, and case studies of people being able to better regulate their diabetes with it, with reducing their exposure. It's type 3 here because we know what type 1 and type 2 have already been defined. This is type 3, a third causer. And diabetes is quite rising in different places, in New Zealand too. People will say it's sugar. One thing to mention, my friend said to me once, when I talked about the EMF and how I thought it was affecting me, he said, "Oh, like the sun," sarcastically. And I thought, not quite. There's a bit of difference between natural EMF and artificial EMF. So the first two are coherence and polarization. Coherence means they're all in the same wavelength. So if you have two waves and they're both going at the same time, they're coherent. If you have one wave like this, slow, and you have another wave like this, fast, they're incoherent. To transmit a signal, you need coherent waves for a receiver to pick it up. The second one is polarization. So polarization, if I draw a wave coming towards you in this plane like this, it'll be vertically polarized. If I draw it like this, it'll be horizontally polarized. With natural light, it's polarized in every single direction. So some of it is this way, some of it's this way, some of it's this way. It's random. With artificial EMFs, it's either in the vertical direction or horizontal direction. The other big one is modulation. Modulation basically means modified signal. So to transmit some information, you don't just need a wave, you need to add some information on top of that to be able to transmit it. The carrier wave is just the thing that gets it there, but the modulation is what transfers the data. And there's a lot of scientific papers that show that at the same intensity of exposure, modulated waves cause biological effects, but unmodulated waves don't cause any effects. And then they conclude, well, we've did it with a signal generator, there's no effects, so this is safe. But they didn't take the finesse of actually we're having modulated signals and they're a lot more biologically active. The last one is the frequency range. So we have evolved with a natural frequency range. Most of it's from the sun. None of it's coming from the sun. Well, tiniest proportion from the sun is in the microwaves. You can almost discount it. Whereas artificial ones are in the microwave range, so they're lower frequencies than what we're used to. There's another one, Schumann, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. So 5G, there's a lot of interest about it, and I almost like to go back and broaden the mind from just 5G to the entire spectrum. 5G is just an extra. All radio waves have harm in them. So if we just focus on one particular one and forget about all the others, it's a little bit silly. So I'd say if you're worried about 5G, worry about your Wi-Fi router first. Worry about your cell phone first, worry about radio stations or transformer stations nearby or power lines, and then add the 5G later. And at the moment, we don't really have 5G. What we really have is 4G+. It's using the same frequencies. It's slightly different protocol, but very much the same. The novel 5G will come in the future when we start going to the very high bandwidths where they do need the higher frequencies. There's a lot of also interest and an interesting point about oxygen absorption. At 60 gigahertz, oxygen has this property of it being more, it being its resonant frequency. Radio waves get absorbed at 60 gigahertz by oxygen. Similarly to Wi-Fi or microwaves at 2.5 gigahertz, water absorbs that. That's why your microwave oven can heat food, because water vibrates when you radiate it with 2.5 gigahertz. And so what you can see here is around 60 gigahertz is a peak for oxygen absorption. At first, when I saw this, I thought two things. One is a little bit troubling because your hemoglobin needs to carry oxygen around your body, and the way hemoglobin works is it really loosely binds to oxygen because it wants to be able to let it go when it gets to the right place, and then hold on to carbon dioxide very loosely so then it can let it go again. That's why when you get carbon monoxide poisoning, what happens is carbon monoxide has a very high affinity for the hemoglobin, so it binds on really tight and it doesn't let go, and then oxygen can't bind there, and it takes a long time for the carbon monoxide to let go. But in the context of 60 gigahertz, if we're exciting the molecules at that point, will hemoglobin still be able to hold on because it's such a fine touch that it does to do its thing? So now we move on to power density. And there is one important thing, how EMI is measured, and the answer is power density. The units are milliwatts per meter squared. That's the units I use, and there are reasons for that. In plain English, it's the amount of energy emitted onto a 1 meter by 1 meter square every second. So if you get a solar panel and you shine it at something and you record how much energy is coming off it every second, that's the power density. And I'll just do a little analogy because it's sometimes it's a bit hard to fully understand. So here I've got a light, and I'll hold it up high so everyone can see it. So about the third row here, you're about 3 meters away, and what you'll be seeing is 170 milliwatts per meter square when this light is turned off, because we can't see the we can only see a very narrow one. So this is a good analogy to put it into your mind roughly what these numbers mean. So 170 for the third row, the back row you'll see about 31, and if you're all the way at the end of the wall, you'll see about 8. So I'll turn it on, I'll hold it up right so everyone can see. So front row 170, back row is about 40. Because now we'll get into some numbers. We'll skip through these. We won't cover each one because we'll be here all night. There is one I do want to cover, which is this one here, Schumann resonance. Schumann resonance is about 8 hertz. It's the natural resonance of the Earth. Basically, when lightning strikes somewhere, because of the shape of the Earth, lightning emits all frequencies, but only some can resonate in its cavity between the ionosphere and the Earth, almost like a guitar string. You know, if you pluck it based on the weight, the tension, it'll produce a certain tone. If you shorten the string, it'll produce a different tone. It's to do with its geometry. So Earth has its own geometry, and because of that, we have Schumann resonance. Schumann resonance, we evolved with that, and our brain waves actually very closely match the Schumann resonance signal. In some studies, they've even shown that they sync up with it. Maybe it's evolutionary advantageous for us to, you know, if there's something already resonating, to sync up with that. But that is very interesting. And also, they've done studies with people in bunkers where they put them in a shielded bunker, so underground, completely isolated from the Schumann resonance. And after a couple of weeks, they started feeling awful. They lost their circadian rhythm, their well-being went down. They then introduced an artificial Schumann resonance through a signal generator, and the circadian rhythm started coming back into play, and they started to feel better. Now, what we want to pay attention here is this number, 0.000003. That's a very tiny number, but people need that number. People need that level of Schumann resonance to have their well-being. So this is the level of what biology has evolved with. If we start looking further down, so these are table of effects. These are scientific literatures of where there is a power density specified in milliwatts per meter squared, and what sort of outcome there is, and what sort of system it affects. So if we see here, we're all under 0.1 milliwatts, and you start to see already fertility problems with reduced sperm count. You start to see chronic exposure that causes sleep disturbances, abnormal blood pressure, nervousness, weakness, fatigue, limb pain, joint pain, digestive problems, fewer school children promoted. 0.02, we're starting to observe these effects. So going further down, we're still under 1. All of these are between 0.1 to 0.6, and you see a whole bunch of different papers by different people showing very similar symptoms: fatigue, depressive tendencies, sleep disorders, causes headaches, irritation, concentration difficulties. Headaches, concentration difficulties. These are different papers. Short-term exposure, conduct problems in children. You get the idea. Now we move down, so we're starting to get higher. It's up to, all of these are up to 10. And you see other things pop in, like cancer, leukemia, near TV transmitter towers, another cancer, brain effects, pathological leaks in the blood-brain barrier. So blood-brain barrier is very important. It's what keeps the good stuff in our brain, the bad stuff out, and it makes sure only the proper things can get past it, because our brain's very sensitive. If you start disrupting that, then any toxin, well, not any, but a lot of toxins that we are constantly exposed to can more easier penetrate that, and then you start to get other problems as a consequence. So this is one I will talk about. We talked about fertility. This one paper, it's got a level of 10 milliwatts per meter squared, and what they found is irreversible infertility in mice after 5 generations in what they called an antenna park. They stopped the experiment because they had no more mice to experiment with because they couldn't have babies. But that's quite alarming that it caused irreversible infertility. And these levels are still quite low. So we can go higher, up to 50, up to 100 milliwatts per meter squared. So we're at 100. Cardiacs, some people have heart variability. There's a lot of different studies here, and we're not going to go through each one. What the idea behind this is that this is not a one-off cherry-picked. This is very systematic, and a lot of them. And this is only the papers that have specific power density specified. There's a lot of papers that have qualitative analysis, so they look at qualities rather than quantities. There's a lot of papers that reference SAR rate, specific absorption rate. These are just a subsection of the ones that give us the numbers. What happened was I started measuring and I thought, hey, I'm getting some numbers. What do these numbers mean? I scratched my head. What do they mean? What is safe? What is unsafe? So I started looking for papers that specify what levels, and there are safety guidelines in place. So we can go quite high. I want to do a little exercise now. You've seen a lot of different papers. I want you to raise your hand if you think the safety level that we're exposed to should be lower than 100,000 milliwatts. Okay, good. 10,000, keep your hand up, 10,000, 1,000, 100, 10, 1, 0.1. Okay, sir, you guys still have your hands up. You're close to building biologist guidelines, and they still go a little bit lower, but that's where we should be aiming from. So, but it is surprising. Now we'll see what the actual levels are. So New Zealand standards are based on FCC standards. They're based on short-term thermal effects, based on 3 animal studies. Basically what they had was they got mice, they trained them to press a lever for food, then they irradiated them at very high levels for half an hour. When the mice could no longer perform the task, they said, there's effects there, we'll make the levels 50 times lower than that, and that'll be safe for the next 50 years to come. So there's other standards. Russian standards are 100 times lower than New Zealand, and this was established on Soviet scientific literature. They were the first to actually investigate this. Western scientists found the same results a little bit later, but they weren't so vocal about it. But they did find the same results. So there are other recommendations of safety levels like building biologist, bioinitiative report, European guidelines that are based on non-thermal and long-term biological effects. So here we have the standards. New Zealand allows 10,000 up to 10,000 milliwatts per metre squared. So that light that you saw in the front row at 170, that's not quite, that's safe, more than safe. You can have that light, if you're 1 metre away, so about where I am now, it'll only be 1,500. So you can go, it can be even brighter. And when I looked at that light, it was hurting my eyes, and my eyes are used to light. You know, they're supposed to see that light. So Russia, China, 100. Building biologist, 0.01. Europe, bioinitiative report, 0.03. Now, these are all milliwatts per metre squared. European guidelines as well, much lower. Now, this just graphically illustrates it. Here the numbers are almost 10 million. It'll be 10 million for up to 2 gigahertz. But these units are microwatts per metre squared, not milliwatts. So if you divide that by 1,000, you'll get that 10,000 we were talking about. But you can just see the contrast of the level. It's a little bit off scale. So I was curious when I started getting symptoms, what actually changed in 2016? And there was a bit of anecdotal evidence. For example, 4G was piloted in 2014. 2015 it started rolling out. 2016 I started getting symptoms. Wi-Fi also got an upgrade. Before my final year, everybody complained that you couldn't get Wi-Fi everywhere. There's cold spots and you have to go to a certain place. Last year, beautiful coverage. Everyone was happy. Everyone was on their gadgets. And more places started to offer Wi-Fi. So I started searching for objective data because engineers, they like to look at numbers. They don't like anecdotes. But I found there was very little to be found. There was one data point from the WHO, from one of the WHO reports for European, from New Zealand. And from that, 20 years ago, 2004, exposures are generally less than 0.2 milliwatts per metre squared. So 0.2 milliwatts. And in central Auckland, about 500 metres from our main TV radio transmitter, exposure reached 0.4 milliwatts per metre squared. And most of it was attributed to AM radio stations. So just remember that number. 0.4 was the max that we had. 0.2 was the standard 20 years ago. That's not a long time ago. The other piece of data was from the Ministry of Health reports. So every year there's one character that goes out and does independent tests using standards that average out the signals over a time period. So you don't actually pick up the peak. You can have a very large peak and then something very low, and then if you average it, he just gives the average numbers because that's what the standard says. But even from his reports, if you look at his measurements, between 2003 and 2008, his measurements were giving about 10 milliwatts per metre squared for 1NZ or Vodafone. Then from 2015 to 2022, it was 37. The same guy, the same measurements, but they're increased. Similar with Spark. So Spark only started in 2014, their measurements, but 2014 to 18 was about 23. Then 2019 to 22, it's about 31. So it's a bit of an increase. So you can see on a graph, if you plot these numbers and you get rid of some of the really high outliers, you get a very steady trend of increases. So this is just taking his reports and analysing his own data. Another thing we can look at is Wi-Fi density. So we can see here in 2002, very little Wi-Fi around. 2005, it's quite boring. There's only a few places in the city centre. 2008, still very low. 2011, start some activity, but not so much. 2014, oh, it's getting a little bit of purple. The purple is how much Wi-Fi there is. 2017, wow, it's getting quite active. I think around 2010 was when the smartphones started becoming big, and so Wi-Fi needed to develop very quickly and be adopted very quickly, because what's the point of a smartphone if you can't, if you have to pay for data? So Wi-Fi started getting very popular. Same thing if we just look at very specifically over this time period of between 2010 and 2018, how much it's changed. You can see there is quite a bit of growth in this. This is something that's changed in our environment. Most places you go to now offering Wi-Fi. So now onto some real-world measurements, because very little data, as you've seen all the data that exists. I wanted to get data of what there is in the right now. So I collected it with a GQ EMF 390. It's an amateur meter. It's close to what calibrated meters produce at higher levels. At lower levels, it's not so accurate. So that's a bit of a disclaimer. And then recorded GPS with a mobile telephone. And then the two sets of data, combine them so they're on the same, they're matched. And then process them just to cluster it, because some places, because a lot of the logging I did was passively. Whenever I'm driving somewhere, I take my two loggers, gather the data, and so some places have a lot of data points, and if you display it on a map, it gets quite busy and a lot of data points. So clustered them, so points, if you have, say, a lot of points here, they'd be grouped together into a single point where you calculate the average, and then a lot of points here, you group them together. So just makes it a bit cleaner. And then we can visualize it with software like QGIS. GIS stands for Graphical Information Software. I'm plugging a lot of these ones because QGIS is an open source software, and I'm a firm believer in that. So first we look at Devonport. Now Devonport is quite nice. I'll just talk you through what you're looking at. On the very right is the legend. So some of the cell towers at the top are labeled. So they're 2 degrees, 1NZ, Spark. And if they're 5G, they've got a little star on top. When we zoom in, you'll be able to see that a bit better. And then we have power density. So as we discussed before, we saw the papers, what power density is needed to cause biological effects. What power density there was 20 years ago, it was 0.2. And how the power density has increased from the cell transmitters up to now. Anything that's dark green is relatively good. Again, disclaimer, my unit doesn't measure low very accurately. It measures high quite well, but lower not so much. So I'm a little bit dubious on how low it actually is. But we'll work with what we have. Anything getting into the yellow is basically not very good. Anything above orange is building biologists recommend do not spend a long time there. That's very severe, get out. I want to point out two things in this map. So we'll look at this region here, we'll then look at this region here, and we'll look at this region here, and we'll look at this region here. But just as an overview, you can almost see a nice circle of green on the outside here, then lighter green here, then starting to yellow, and then starting to purple and pink and purple and red. And similar here, you have this section here, which is almost all green, because it's quite far away from anything else. This transmitter here is obviously pointing in a different direction, because even this is not very affected. But there is quite a bit of a range between the measurements. So the first one is up here that we're seeing. This is a very busy intersection, and it's very visually, you can see a lot of cell towers on it. It's one that stands out. And you can see the type of radiation pattern that we have. So some of the numbers here are actually labeled, some of the higher numbers. So you have 25 39, 25 around this area here. And remember, each one of these data points represents a number of data points. It's, in this area, there might be 5 points of data that we've averaged out, and we said, okay, this 1 point of data will be the average of that. This might be several points of data, and we averaged it. Some might be higher, some might be lower, but this is, on average, here it's 2. But you can start to get an idea of what the sort of levels we are actually experiencing today. This is an interesting case because there's only 2 cell towers here compared to the before where there was 1, 2, 3, 4. By the way, each one of these cell towers may have multiple transmitters. It's not one transmitter, it could have multiple at different frequency bands, but there's one installation of that. So here there's only 2 installations, but it's very, very noisy. You can see 50, 57, 50, 30, 64, 68, up to 14 at a quite a generous distance, about 200 meters away. You're still getting quite high values. And you can see all the way around these areas too. They're not so happy. They're in yellow and orange. Now we look at the wharf. We've got as many clusters as we had in our first slide, but notice there's not very much purple. There's a few purple data points. Most of them are red, most of them are orange. If we just go back here, very red, very orange, very big, slightly red, slightly orange, lots of yellow, but the same number of transmitters. So there are quite a variability in what you get in the real world from these things. And then lastly, I just wanted to show this section here. Again, a very long string, so you can see the distance that this one affects is quite far. There's a good line of sight. But you see these houses are on a hill, and this is a region that's very green, and if you're living in the city, you'd almost want to live here. So now we look at East Auckland. And you'll see a bit of a contrast between East Auckland and Devonport. If we look at them side by side, Devonport is on one side, East Auckland's on the other, and you see it's roughly the same size of image we're looking at, but you can see there's not as many clusters for Devonport compared to East Auckland, and they're not as long. They're sort of you can see the greens between, whereas some of these areas they just link up between each other, so you almost get no green spots. So Bucklands Beach. There's one cell tower on here, but it's not labelled on this map. But you can see very high, up to 60 and 80 in this very localized region. But even if you go down the road, you're still at 6. You're still above the severe concerned area. And if you go down along the beach, this must be on a hill and very good line of sight, because even at a very far distance, you're still above 1, which is not recommended. This one I want to point out because, first of all, this is one that's really close to my house and causing me a bit of grief. You can see how much of an area it affects. But also notice, there's another cell tower here. Notice this is Maclean's College right next to this. And all of these, I haven't measured inside here, but all of you can extrapolate how much it would be. This is Bucklands Beach Intermediate School. And if you measure from here where you get a nice line of sight, you're getting 5, 7, 9. This is Pigeon Mountain Primary School. So this is very close to where people live and where children get educated. Now this is one of the worst intersections I've seen. Again, it's in my local area. But you can see some of these readings, even if you average out over multiple data points, because I drive past there quite a bit over the time, it's at 100 and 107. And most of these are at in this area in the 20s and 30s. Even further out in this radius here, you're still above 1, above 10 in most cases. And only here up Pigeon Mountain Hill, you must be a good line of sight, because going down the hill, you get a good blast from one of these. So this is a comparison between, so this is Eastern Beach, and there's only 2 towers. This one's 5G enabled, apparently, but they're not big, giant things. They're like standard. If you look in comparison to this one, there's a lot more transmitters. You can see that the rooftops are lined with transmitter after transmitter, but this one's very red for a very far distance. They're the same scale. You can see this is almost taking the entire screen of scale, where this one, it's already going to yellow at half the screen. So there's a lot of variability. You won't be able to see anything here, but we'll zoom in. This is the overview for Auckland, and where I found the most sort of the highest danger places. So busy intersections and highways. So these are just some of the highways: Panmure intersection, Sylvia Park, and Southeastern Highway. Anywhere you drive along there, you get quite a you can't escape, and people have to take them. There are arterial routes. Motorway, Northwestern Motorway, if you're going out west, all the way along, you get a good dose. This is the Harbour Bridge. It's probably got a good line of sight, because it's all purple. And Upper Harbour Bridge. And this is where we're heading to. This is the city centre. Again, not very arterial. There's quite a few arterial routes, but even in the city centre, it's all quite red. And if we look at the contrast between Devonport, East Auckland, and Central, Devonport still has a long way to go, but it's got potential. East Auckland, it's getting there. Central, it's well on its way. So the last thing is dirty electricity. And for this, we'll have a bit of a live demo. It's called electromagnetic interference, or voltage transients, or line noise, but it's sharp spikes in the voltage between 1 Hertz to 150 kilohertz. There's a lot of different sources of dirty electricity, but we'll show you. Bear with me while I just change the cameras. All right. So hopefully everyone can see. I'll sit down so it's a little bit, I don't have to, you can still hear me. So first thing I want to point out is this is just a voltage probe. If we turn it on and we put it on high sensitivity, we can see we have electric fields coming off the wires, and they extend quite a bit. The other thing I want to point out is if I go like this, so it's not reacting when it's just by itself, and I can touch it here, but as soon as I come close with my own self, it goes through. So our bodies are quite conductive. They pick up these electric fields, and it's something to be quite aware of. Most people don't feel it, and even I don't feel it. You might feel after effects, though. Dirty electricity is something a little bit different. It's high voltage transient spikes. So we'll just switch off the laptop for now, and we'll switch this one off because this is very noisy. And we'll focus on first lighting. So we have an LED light here, and if I just turn on, this is just a normal AM radio, and it's tuned to an off station. You can hear something, but not very loud. A little bit.
A little bit, but not much, because this LED is actually quite good. It's almost as good as an incandescent light bulb, but there are other LEDs that are not so good. Now we're going to switch to a fluorescent light bulb, compact fluorescent. Where's that coming from? So, highly recommend you don't have compact fluorescent, because also all of your wires in your house that lead up to that will also have that same dirty electricity. It has to come through somewhere. Next, we come to some chargers. So we plug in our phone because it needs to be charging something. We can do it without plugging it in, and it's got a bit of noise. But when we plug it in, so that was a quiet charger, and we get progressively louder. This one's my favorite. Not very nice. Next, we move on to the laptop. So we switch that on. Yeah, not music to anyone's ears. So this radio is just picking up this is generating lots of high frequency spikes. They emit electromagnetic radiation. This is picking the spikes that are in its frequency range up. It emits all frequency ranges. This is just detecting a very narrow bandwidth of them. And that about concludes it. Thank you very much.
Question here.
Hi, thank you. What was the difference in those chargers that you were using there?
I'm not quite sure the exact difference. If you notice, some of them are better quality. We'll leave it on this.
They all fast charging ones, or?
No, some of them are very cheap. So this charger here is a very cheap Chinese charger. This charger here, I'm not sure, but it's got a built-in light, and it really screams at different frequencies. And what's interesting with some of them, they've got a little accumulator that regulates it. So if this is now unplugged, if I plug it in, give it a bit of charge.
That with the car charger?
No.
Like charging the phone in the car?
Oh, similar thing. Sometimes even if you've ever heard a high whistling thing on your stereo that matches your revs, that can actually be interference from your car charger playing on your radio. I have heard that actually interfere with the radio before. Haven't tried it with a car charger, but I suspect it'll be quite noisy because they're quite small and not a lot of good components.
Do you know anything about the street lamps that are around the little box on the top?
It's like for me, I get pressure in my head as soon as I'm anywhere near them. And the new ones in the new area in Whenuapai, they've got these little tentacles on top of them as well.
Oh, tentacles.
Wires on top of them.
Yeah.
wireless thing connected?
I'm not so sure because I was curious about some of these lampposts as well, to the point where I've found one that's been fallen over by a car hitting it, and I took it home, I took it apart.
How's the car?
I wanted to see what's inside. I was curious, I wanted to answer that question. And I didn't find anything obviously dodgy in that one. And then there was, they were upgrading the street lamps on our street, and I kindly went up to the technicians that were doing the installation. I said, can I pretty please have a look inside? And they said, sure, we've got an old one. And I looked inside, a similar sort of thing, but I cannot speak for all of them. I can only speak for 2 or 3 that I have looked at. Another thing with lamps though is at the moment with the new LEDs, they're using LEDs which first of all they flicker, and second of all it's very narrow bandwidth. Our eyes are used to a very broad spectrum of natural light. LEDs produce very sharp bandwidths, and the flicker as well. It's not so good for our eyes. Some people get headaches from artificial lights like that.
Can I ask another question? Do you know the safety distances between the power, the wireless towers and,
As far as possible. From a lot of papers, anywhere within 500 meters, you're starting to get a lot more people with problems. But with what we've seen with the different levels, it doesn't actually take quite a lot to be problematic. There's also one other thing I need to point out. Bigger is not necessarily, or higher levels is not necessarily more dangerous. There are other things at play, but what you do get if you have something that's emitting very high amount is it affects a lot bigger of an area, and also you've got a lot of different, a lot more chances of falling into a space which is at a level that's not so good. There have been studies where they found that there's certain window effects where at some frequencies certain intensities give as much biological effects as a very high intensity at the same frequency. It's almost paradoxical. It's not linear. It's not just a straight off, higher the higher the worse. There's some other nuances, but for cell tower, for any sort of even dirty electricity, as far away as you possibly can be. 500 meters is a bit of a not so good. If you're about a kilometre away, you're probably a little bit easier, but distance is your friend, time is your enemy.
Hi, thanks for that. It's really interesting. Could you give us some practical tips of the top kind of things we could do in our homes to safeguard against dirty electricity? Practical, easy things that we can do to make a significant difference.
Yes, so some of the things are switch it off, or even better, unplug it. Don't have it near your bedroom, especially if you're sleeping at night, and a lot of people charge their phones. Keep that out of your bedroom. Even better, if you want to go a step further, if your house is relatively new and you've got a proper wiring inside it, you can switch the circuit breakers to certain rooms off at night, and that's the best way to eliminate electric fields and dirty electricity. Just cut the power to that section of the house. Other things are just increasing your distance. So if you don't work with your laptop on your lap, try to keep it at a distance. If you can high-five your screen, you're probably too close. So try to get a bigger monitor, but sit a bit further away from it. And yeah, the best thing you can probably do is switch the power off at night so your body has time to recover over the night period.
Thank you.
I'm actually a building biologist, and recognised as probably one of the expert people in dirty electricity in Australasia.
Paul?
Yes.
Ah, nice to meet you, Paul. I've been meaning to cross paths with you.
Hi. If I could kind of answer your question a little bit, what Alexi said is... Oh, sorry. I don't know if you heard that, but I'm recognised as a bit of an expert in dirty electricity. What Alexi said is completely correct. What I would suggest, though, is the only real way to know what your situation is actually to measure it, and you guys haven't got a Stetzer meter here. Okay. If you, it's STETZIRZER, Stetzerizer, and you can, if you look on Amazon, it's the only thing that you can really use to measure dirty electricity, and then you turn things off and on, and then you can see what it is. There were filters that you could plug in to mitigate dirty electricity, but they're no longer available for Australasian plugs. Which is just nuts. I used to be the main distributor for the Stetzer filters, and you just can't get them. I'm retired now, so I'm not in the business anymore. But yeah, but unless you can measure, you don't know. The AM is very much an indicator, but not a measurement. So hopefully it's been helpful.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone else? Yes?
We have power packs, like my husband's a builder, so he has power packs, and we have an attachment that we can charge our cell phones in. So would that be safer than actually going through your house electricity? Or am I actually at danger of charging the power packs in the first place?
Yes. Yes.
So those power packs, because he's got all his houses run off those power packs?
Unfortunately, the answer is it depends. You can have one power supply which is very good quality, if it's been well dampened and well designed by the engineer that designed it and the company that made it, they can be wonderful. If the other one can be really bad. So while your husband's charging all his batteries for his job, he could actually be putting a lot of dirty electricity into the car, into your building. And the one thing Alexi kind of alluded to is that it goes everywhere. So if you have dirty electricity from one device, it goes to every single piece of wiring in your whole house, and your neighbours. And if you have solar panels and you have an inverter, your house, the house with the inverter is the part that puts out massive amounts of dirty electricity, that can actually pollute every single house on the same transformer. And as a building biologist, I do not recommend solar power.
That's another discussion we can have in another evening. Right. Quick, last question?
Yeah, Mike, thank you. I found that if you go to a hotel or you stay in an apartment and you've got your computer and you want to get online, you've got a choice of maybe 40 or 50 different wireless systems to tune into. So if we are wanting to wake up humanity, we've got to let them know that if they're in the middle of a city, they're in a microwave oven that's got about 40 or 50 or 70 dials on it. And so I think this is one way we've got to let people know that to be, say, in a Queen Street hotel, they're cooking themselves, they're destroying their life. And I think this is one of the things that we need to be able to tell people, that particularly children, if children go to stay overnight with their parents in a hotel, they're in a storm. So how can we go about this? Thank you.
Maybe our next speaker can take us there. Alexei, thank you.
That's sort of why I wanted to build a picture of how things have changed over time, to show that, because people have adapted and it's normal, it's almost like you've always had your cell phone your entire life, but this is very recent and very new, and I wanted a way to highlight that.
And Alexei, thank you. So remarkable amount of research this man has done, and he's made it very clear to many of us who maybe don't have a scientific background. Thank you again. Our next speaker was not permitted to speak at the Takapuna local board meeting last week, so I imagine that he has something quite dangerous to say to us, but he is getting the floor and the microphone this evening, so I want to welcome Michael Vaughan. At last.
Yeah, you get to speak. Good evening. My name is Michael Vaughan. I'm a registered psychologist with the New Zealand Psychologist Registration Board. I specialise in working with children and their families, helping children with a range of emotional difficulties such as low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, and so forth. I've been interested in this topic for quite some time now and done extensive research. As a psychologist, I'm an analyst. I don't jump to conclusions quickly. And so when I first read articles that were bringing into question the safety or perhaps lack of wireless radiation, it piqued my interest, and doing what psychologists do, I started to research in depth. Since that time, I've probably put in a few thousand hours reading different papers and reviews and so forth. And what is very clear to me is that there are certainly grounds for concern in terms of wireless radiation. I've recently been doing talks about the whole concept of, or the whole topic of children and screen time. I've been delighted to see that in the media, at last, the media's actually been on our side for once in terms of actually starting to really publicise the need for people to be thinking very carefully about how much screen time children have. Of course, nothing's mentioned about the radiation side of things. That is just a taboo topic, seemingly. The mainstream media doesn't seem to want to go there. Could be because they don't want to upset the telcos, because they get a lot of advertising revenue from the telcos, of course. But it's good that at least the media is starting to talk about the issue of children and screen time, because it is a grave concern to me that many, many children are having huge amounts of screen time. There are a whole range of psychological effects and physical effects, in addition to those that we've been talking about tonight in relation to the radiation. So, given that it's very, very hard to get people to open their ears to the whole topic of wireless radiation, you know what it's like, you tend to get viewed as a sort of fringe lunatic, that's been living in a cave in the Coromandel or something, wearing a tin hat. The media's done a very, very good job of, kind of putting people down who are raising any concerns about wireless radiation. And so now that it's become a topic of interest in the media, I've been thinking that as a psychologist, obviously, I can speak on the whole topic of the psychological effects of excessive screen time on children. But the difference is I can also bring in a little bit about the radiation as well, so that we can start this whole process of informing the community, many of whom are very, very closed, of the possibility that these devices that people have become so used to and so comfortable with are perhaps not as safe as people think. We're away, are we? Good. Alexi's doing my slides. Thank you.
You can see on here as well if you want to.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thank you. So the two speakers tonight have already talked quite a bit about the health concerns in relation to wireless radiation. So I don't want to do a lot of repetition, so I'm going to skip through some of these things quite quickly. For those of you who, like me, like to really go into the research, the science, before forming your opinions on subjects, In terms of researching the adverse health effects of wireless radiation, there are some excellent websites. Anyone who would like a copy of these slides, by the way, would like these references and these websites, etc., I'd be very, very happy to supply those to you if you come and have a chat with me afterwards, and I'll grab your email, etc. There's a massive amount of studies, as Robin was mentioning, on the kind of the Wi-Fi, the 3G, the 4G type frequencies. And there are thousands of studies that have identified harmful effects at levels way below the New Zealand safety standards. The whole issue of the safety standards is something that we'll talk about along the way. Yep. So despite the fact that it's ridiculed in kind of the press and in the general population, if you have concerns about wireless radiation, the World Health Organization actually got the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, to review all the studies, and there are thousands of them, to see what they came up with in terms of, okay, is there reason for concern here? And the result of their analysis of the scientific research is that this wireless microwave frequency radiation that's given out by all these devices and Wi-Fi routers, etc., they classified it as a Class B possible human carcinogen. In other words, they're saying it's not absolutely definite, but there is grounds for concern. Now, since then, there's been a whole range of studies, and the evidence has just kept piling up that there are health effects at levels way below the sort of safety standards that we have here in New Zealand. Yep. But unfortunately, no amount of evidence can ever convince people who don't want to be convinced. And, we have to be realist, don't we? And we have to acknowledge that the government and the telcos have a very close relationship, because the whole telecommunications thing, the rollout of 5G and all that kind of stuff, it's all part of a big agenda, isn't it, to change the way society operates, to embrace technology. Now, I'm not against technology, but I just happen to believe that health is more important. But unfortunately, anyone expressing concerns about the health aspects is just a nuisance, because, when a government and when corporates, big corporations are after profits, governments want to be seen to be progressive and help the economy. And so they are in bed together in terms of dampening down any concerns about the health aspects. Yep. So what does the Ministry of Health say about all this? Well, if they were here tonight, they would say, well, there's nothing to see here. As long as the exposure that you get is below the New Zealand safety standards, then everything's okay. In fact, any time a group of parents have gone to a school and expressed concerns about the exposure of children for 6 hours a day to Wi-Fi radiation from the routers, which incidentally in schools are kind of industrial strength routers. They're dual band routers. They're not like the normal domestic Wi-Fi routers. Plus, of course, the radiation from all the devices. So if anyone expresses concerns, then the typical way it goes is this. Principal, if the principal's actually going to listen in the first place, some of them will, some of them won't, but the principal will then say, okay, we'll get back to you. The principal will then contact the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education say, oh, well, we don't know much about this because this is to do with health. So they refer to the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health is a whole bunch of civil servants who can't really be bothered researching this, probably. And so they defer to a committee that advises them on this very subject, on what are the safe levels for this type of radiation And unfortunately, this committee, as has already been referred to, is stacked with industry representatives from the telco industry, from the electrical industry, and there's very, very little specialist scientific expertise on that committee. And so, unfortunately, it goes in that kind of circle. Now, that committee has got a leading member on it by the name of Martin Gledhill. And Martin Gledhill owns a company that measures the radiation from cell towers. And so his company has contracts with the telecommunications industry. And yet he is the leading figure on this committee that's advising the Ministry of Health. So obviously he's a friend of the industry. He's not going to do anything to damage his income, you know, from all these contracts with the telcos. And so basically the Ministry of Health is not receiving independent advice on this subject. Now, SaferTech NZ, group of us, we've been fighting this battle for ages now. We've been sending complaints off to all and sundry, but they don't really want to listen because it's inconvenient. They've got it all sewn up. Don't bother us. We're all fine. Thank you very much. So the safety standards, obviously they determine the amount of wireless radiation that the New Zealand public can be exposed to. And that's not just adults, it's children, it's babies, it's unborn babies. And again, it has been referred to tonight, but it's a really, really important point. Countries around the world have safety standards, which means allowable limits of radiation, that are literally hundreds of times lower than ours. Not 2 or 3 times, but hundreds of times lower than ours. So the question is, who's got it right? And it's a pretty important question, isn't it? Because that's something you want to get right, isn't it? In terms of, you know, how much radiation are babies and children and us as adults going to be exposed to? That's not something you want to get wrong, is it? And so when you see around the world such massive variation in what different governments are saying is and isn't safe, that has to raise a few questions in our minds, doesn't it? Are we sure we know best? Yep. This has been shown earlier, but it's a very, very clear representation. On the right, in New Zealand, we take these levels that have been recommended by this organisation called ICNIRP, which is a self-appointed club, basically, because you can't get on that committee unless you're invited by somebody who's already on the committee. So who are they going to invite on the committee? People who agree with them. So it's a self-perpetuating thing. So they've recommended these sky-high levels, which we have adopted. So have Australia, so have the States, and the UK, but then there's a whole bunch of other countries, as you can see there, that are saying, no, we're going to actually take steps on the basis of the research we've reviewed to protect our populations. We don't accept those limits there. We're going to be proactive. We're going to protect our populations. Yep. So as a psychologist working with children, obviously I'm particularly interested in the health effects on children. This slide here is really quite concerning because this shows the penetration of radiation into the brain of, on the one side, an adult with a skull thickness of 2 millimeters. And then you've got the 10-year-old with a skull thickness of 1 millimeter. And then the 5-year-old child's only got a skull thickness of 0.5 millimeter. So you can see the radiation in the case of the 5-year-old, the penetration of the radiation goes really right through from one side or the other. It goes right through the skull, penetrating right deeply into the brain. So that is with a device held close to the head. We'll be talking a little bit as we go about what things can you recommend to your children or teach your children to do to reduce their risk, to reduce their exposure. But the one thing that is an absolute definite number one is never, 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 never hold a cell phone to the head unless it's an emergency situation. Put it on speaker, get it away from you. Radiation drops off very, very rapidly with distance. Yep. So why are children more vulnerable? Well, as we've said, they have smaller heads than adults, and so the wireless radiation can go deeper into the brain. There's a shorter distance from where the device is, if they're putting a cell phone near their head, from there to the center of the brain. The safety standards have been very, very crudely set, and part of that was based on various studies, and they used like a full-size military male mannequin-sized head to do their experiments. Most children don't have military male-sized heads, as you probably noticed. Children's brains are different physiologically from adults' brains. As well as the skull being thinner, the actual composition of the brain is different. We won't get too technical, but it's to do with the water composition, a few other things, which makes them more vulnerable. And the result of all of that is that research shows that children can absorb up to 10 times more radiation in the bone marrow of their skulls than adults. A whole lot of research studies here, and as I say, come up to see me if you want to delve into this. I'm happy to give you a copy of the PowerPoint. Yep. So what are other countries doing about this? Well, here's something that not many people know. France has banned Wi-Fi from nursery schools and restricted its use in children, in teaching children up to the age of 11. How many of our early childhood teachers know that? If you know any early childhood teachers, please tell them. Cyprus has also banned Wi-Fi from kindergartens. Israel only also prohibits Wi-Fi in preschools and kindergartens. And there's a whole lot of other measures being taken in various places around the world in recognition of the health effects of wireless radiation. But in New Zealand, nothing. I won't go through these in detail, but as you can see, around the world, some countries are way ahead of us. Some countries are looking at the research and they're saying, hey, there is enough here to make us think we need to take a precautionary approach. The American Academy of Pediatrics is a pretty prestigious organization, and they're very, very clear on this, saying that the current safety standards, which in America are very similar to those in New Zealand, do not account for the unique vulnerability of children, and also, of course, pregnant women. We've talked about the committee being very, very heavily loaded with industry and government interests. The conflict of interest that Martin Gledhill has as a leading member of the committee. He's the acting secretary, and he also writes the minutes. We all know that he or she who writes the minutes holds the power, right? So, unfortunately, we are battling against a situation in New Zealand where the telcos have pretty much written their own regulations in terms of what they're allowed to do and not do, in terms of where they locate their cell towers, etc. So who wrote the regulations for the telecommunications industry? Let's have a quick look. Surprise, surprise. Again, I don't see an awful lot of specialist health expertise on that working party. And unfortunately, the result of that working party is that telcos can now put cell towers up right outside people's bedroom windows on the council berm, and there's not a thing that you can, well, we can try, and we're trying in Devonport at the moment to kick up as much of a din as we can about it. But basically, in terms of the regulations and the legislation that's in place, it's heavily on the telco side. So it gives us a tough job. There's a lot of talk about 5G, and 5G in particular has been the subject of the conspiracy theory and tinfoil hat brigade type of ridicule from the mainstream media. But there is every reason to be concerned about 5G, because 5G, in terms of the higher frequencies that are envisaged for use in the future for 5G, not so much now, they're mainly similar frequencies to 5G, to 4G at the moment. But when the higher frequencies are introduced down the track, as Robbie mentioned earlier, those frequencies interact with the body in an entirely different way from the existing lower frequencies. And you might think that the radiation not penetrating deeply into the body is a good thing. Well, it is for the internal organs of the body. But the effect that, the skin is our largest organ. It regulates the immune system, has a lot of important functions. Robin knows a lot more about this than I do, of course, and has already spoken, so I don't need to say anything more about that. But the fact that all the radiation from these higher frequencies is absorbed by the skin and the eyes is not something to celebrate. Also, there is almost zero safety testing in terms of the health effects of 5G. In terms of quality studies that are replicated with large sample size, adequately controlled and all that kind of thing, very few studies. There is an absolutely beautiful cover-up of this on the Ministry of Health website. And it's absolutely incredible to me that it's still up there and they haven't taken it down despite all the complaints. But they're basically saying that the research on all the existing radio frequencies for 3G, 4G, etc., can be applied to 5G. Well, that's like saying, because we know about a Toyota, we know all about the performance of a Ferrari. They're both cars, but there's not an awful lot of other similarity. It's the same with these 4G versus 5G, higher 5G frequencies. 5G interacts with the body in an entirely different way. So how they can put on the website that the research for 4G and 3G can be assumed to apply to 5G is just ridiculous. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the Ministry of Health will tell you that everything's fine as long as it's within the New Zealand safety standards. And the trouble is, when the Ministry of Health send out, usually Martin Gledhill, to do these measurements, if parents have complained or something like that, he'll come into the school, he'll take his measurements, and he'll send in the report, and the report will say, oh, the exposure is way below the New Zealand safety standards, it's absolutely fine. That's all well and good if the New Zealand safety standards are protective. As we've already discussed, there's terrific disagreement amongst governments and scientists around the world as to what is safe and what is not. I think we'll move on from that one. So there's a fair amount of doom and gloom tonight in terms of all the possible negative health effects of wireless radiation, etc. But the good news is it is possible to enjoy the benefits of technology whilst largely reducing the risks by hugely reducing your exposure. The best way to avoid the risks is to reduce the exposure. How can you do this? There's some very, very simple things you can do. You don't need Wi-Fi at night. Turn it off. Let your body heal. That's what your body wants to do at night. It wants to rest. It wants to heal. It doesn't need to be bombarded by pulses of unnatural radiation. Keep devices away from your body. There's been a lot of talk about cell towers tonight. And yes, being close to a cell tower isn't great. But a far bigger threat to you than cell towers is your devices. Because you get maximum radiation from sources that are close to you. So if you are using a laptop or an iPad or a phone, and you've got that in contact or very close to your body, you're getting a way higher exposure from that than you will be from your nearest cell tower, even if it's a few hundred meters away. So the big lesson there is keep devices as far away from you as possible and educate your children to do the same. Laptops should never be placed on the lap. Phones should never be placed next to the head. Distance, distance, distance as much as possible. And this should be taught in schools. And our group, Safer Tech NZ, is doing its best to get this message out there. And if any of you have got contacts with sympathetic principals or parent groups, anyone who's willing to host an event, our group is very, very keen to get this education into the community. There are so many simple things you can do and that schools could be teaching kids to do that will vastly reduce their exposure. For instance, at school, when they're not using their devices, they could be encouraged to turn them off or put them in flight mode. As mentioned earlier, if using a cell phone, putting it on speaker at a distance from you is definitely the way to go. Remove all wireless devices and chargers out of your bedroom at night. You just do not need them there. And please don't let your kids have them close anywhere near them while they're sleeping. Some kids, unfortunately, sleep with devices under their pillow. I don't think I need to say any more about that. Wired connections are the way to go. So at home, when I'm doing my work on my computer, I'm sitting there with a wired Ethernet connection from the modem to my computer. That way, I can do my work happily in the knowledge that I'm not getting blasted by radiation from the device and also from the router. By the way, Ethernet's so much better. It's faster, it's more reliable, and a lot more healthy. Yep. So yep, flight mode is your friend. Yep. I'll just say a couple of things, because how many parents have we got here tonight, by the way? You raise your hand if you're a parent. Okay. Any grandparents? Okay. So I'm sure that you guys will be battling the screen time issue. Because one of the things I've found in my practice is that no matter what parents bring kids to see me about initially, at some point in the conversation, the screen time issue comes up. It is the one thing that is causing more conflict in homes than seemingly any other issue. So I'll just give you a couple of, it's slightly sort of at a tangent to what the main thing tonight is, which is the health effects. But in terms of managing the issue with kids, I just highly recommend, as much as you can, education, education, education. Because the end result that you want is for your child or grandchild to get to a point when they need to start making decisions for themselves. You know, you can help them while they're young, but the older they get, believe me, it gets harder. And you want them ultimately to become self-regulating in terms of their device use. So they need to understand why, rather than just being told, rather than just taking a hardline approach like, you know, half an hour screen time and that's it. You know, that can damage the relationship. It doesn't help them understand why. And we also need to understand that kids these days are very interconnected with their friend group through the internet, through social media. And by actually disconnecting them from that in a hard-nosed manner can actually create a lot of anxiety in kids. So if they're not connected, they don't know what's going on in their group, friend group, and that can actually raise a lot of anxiety. So we have to talk to kids about what functionality is your screen time having for you. Now, some of it will be fun, like video games. Some of it will be educational, like related to homework. And some of it will be recreation, watching YouTube and whatever else they do. So we need to have a really good conversation with kids to show them that we're not just wanting to be hard-nosed and scrap the screen time, although deep down you might want to. But the reality is, this is just my opinion, it's very hard to do that in this day and age. It's just going to create a whole lot of problems for your child if you try and completely disconnect them. So we need to understand what is the functionality and then come to some kind of compromise in terms of balancing other recreational activities and family time and screen time. And kids, it won't happen just in one conversation, but over time can grow to appreciate the importance of all those different aspects of their life rather than just sitting on a screen all the time. It is a really, really difficult journey because quite a lot of the stuff kids do online is very addictive, and so they can become very, very upset and sometimes even aggressive if they're asked to come off screens. So this is why we do need to really work at the whole education side of things and come up with some kind of a basic timetable with them that balances the different aspects of their life, but also gives them what they need in terms of the functionality of what they're doing online. Okay? All right. I won't go in my talk, obviously I'll go into a lot more detail on this. And as I say, if any of you are part of parent groups that would be interested in getting advice on the whole children and screen time issue, I'd be very pleased to hear from you, because myself and the SafeTech NZ group really do believe that education, community awareness is the way to go. We've done a lot of lobbying, haven't really got very far. I think, as speakers have said already tonight, the way to go is to reach the people, to increase community awareness. Only when there's a groundswell of people who understand the adverse health effects of exposure to microwave radiation, only when those numbers grow do we have a chance to actually make some change. Because until then, the telcos and the government, they've got too much investment in status quo, and it's too easy for them to put up a stone wall. So my hope from tonight is that those of you who are here and those of you who do have some concern about wireless radiation and the health effects on yourselves and on children, and would like to contribute to the whole effort that we're making to educate the community and make more people aware of this, that we'll find a way to stay connected. I think Michael at the end will round up and invite you to leave your email address so that we have a database, so that when we are planning some sort of campaign, that we can let people know what we're doing. And those of you who are able to help in some way, even only in a very small way, that will be fantastic. So I'll wrap up there, but happy to answer any questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
You have a Telegram channel.
Do I personally or Safe?
No, for the Safeguard.
We discussed it. We have discussed it.
Yeah, it's very interesting you should raise that, because we literally were discussing that at our last meeting. Do you think we should have?
Yeah, I think it should be. I'd be very interested in it.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you, Michael. Lovely to catch up with you. About 2019, I think we were in a group. So I was elected, or I took on the challenge of communicating with the Kindergarten Association. And I set up quite a good resonance with the person because we wanted a win-win out of this. And so I just slowly started giving information to this secretary, and very shortly afterwards they said, please, could you stop forwarding this information? We don't want to know. And this is what we're dealing with across the board. And this is why we have to really get involved with this issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Just a thought that's come to me is the public need to have the fear of God put into them about this. You know, education's great, but, you know, this is a very serious issue, but, you know, we're trying to be very PC about it in a way. And it just occurred to me one day, recently, I was coming up Browns Bay Road, and there was a huge tower going up just feet from somebody's front door, basically. And I'm like, these people have no idea what's going on. And I just feel that maybe a letter could be drawn up with a committee or something that a group of us would deliver to houses there in their letterboxes and actually suggest amongst a bunch of bullet points is that I suggest you actually go and get some health tests done at your doctor's now. Get a blood screen done. Because you've got this tower going up outside, and if any of your children, you, your partner, get sick, or your neighbours, you've got evidence of what your health is right now. You know, it's somehow we've got to get the public interested, as you're saying, and scare them.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in our Devonport campaign, we've done exactly that. We've dropped letters and flyers into the mailboxes of the houses in the areas where those new 5G transmitters are planned for. And from that, we got quite a good response, actually. We had about 80 people at the public meeting that we ran in Devonport. So it is definitely a very worthwhile thing to do.
And it's the same with the schools. Somebody told me recently that a real estate agent commented to my friend that the schools are actually surrounded by these towers. So, you know, flyers being handed out, like, are your children having trouble sleeping? Are they getting more colds than usual? You know, just lists of things that they could spot. Oh, is that to do with these towers that are coming out? It's somehow, I don't know, getting this, you know, bog standard information to them because they're not interested in looking at studies. You know, it's about, like, what's the reality of this? What might they experience? If your families start having insomnia all the time or headaches all the time, they can relate to that. But then they wouldn't have connected it to the tower unless you feed the seed.
Yeah, exactly. On our website, actually, is it already up yet, Alexi? Or?
So that's a very big problem that we have in New Zealand because it's not recognised. Doctors don't know about it apart from very select few doctors who are well more educated and well more holistic. It's a huge avenue that's missed. So what we've been doing is we've been developing a questionnaire to help doctors diagnose sensitivity. It's not complete yet. We've got one on our website, but that was an earlier version. We're working on a more complete version, and as soon as that's ready to go, we will have it on our site, and we will encourage everyone we can to fill one out. This has several purposes. One, it's to gather research in New Zealand. This is something that's missed in a lot of cases. It's something that hasn't really been looked into. The second one is it helps doctors diagnose it. If somebody is sensitive, they can find what the cause are, or if they need to look somewhere else. It can also be used by consultants to assess how their clients' mitigation strategies have worked objectively. And also, like you say, if something has changed, people can see the change. If there's no cell tower before and then something's put in, or they move somewhere else and there's a change in that environment, we can help identify it. The questionnaire that we've put together, it's based on the European guidelines, but we've updated it because some of their stuff was a little bit old. We're still talking about 3G and 2G. We also made it a little bit easier to fill out, systematic and whatnot. So that is coming in the pipeline.
Can I say, is it all right? I've just had, that's loud, a few thoughts. As you guys know, I'm 100% with everything you're doing. I know it's real. And I was just thinking about how you reach the people, because I, for the last 3 years, have been going through my own process of how do I reach the people in terms of mRNA and all the issues around that. And you guys are just so beautifully placed to build community teams for outreach, to have a table at public markets, Saturday markets and Sunday markets. Because what you could do is have your stall set up with your banners and your flyers, your information self-help sheets, but you could actually have volunteers doing EMF testing of people's phones at the table. And it's an incredibly powerful demonstration.
Yeah.
Sorry. Our batteries are running low, guys.
Yeah, it's a really powerful demonstration, and you'd be a real focus of attention in community markets, like take a green market or whatever. That's number one. Number two is it's so important what you're doing with outreach like this, and I do this too with my area, but you just cannot get away from the impact you can have on social media. Despite the censorship on the right platforms on Twitter, you can have a reach really quickly of millions of views a month for this kind of content. So I'm really happy to talk to you guys about what the kind of things I've been doing to help you. Yeah.
That would be great. I mean, we're very aware of this. And in our group, we've got a great mixture of personalities and skills, but the one thing we don't have is a social media expert. So if there's any social media experts amongst you who would like to join our group, even if you could only come along to a meeting once in a blue moon, it would be fantastic for you to step forward.
You may as well harness the devil. The devil being EMF, make it work for you.
Yeah.
I've probably noticed within the last year all of the side effects that were on the screen, including blood nose, and I could be anywhere. But in the last couple of weeks, when I went to you guys' meeting, I could get out of the car, walk towards the wharf, and I'd get hit with this bloom of dizziness. Happened last week or 2 weeks ago in Hobsonville, and the other day right in front of my door. And I'm just living nearby on top of a hill. So I look at one of these bloody suckers right in front of me, which I didn't see when I signed up for the rental. What I've also done is I've actually called the council last week to actually say this is pollution, this is EMF, these are the side effects, and I would like a reference number. Well, it's not in their system. You can't get a reference number. There's some feedback. but feedback is put in a folder. So eventually I spoke to the environmental someone, long debate, explained everything. Why can't I get a reference number? I have to go back to customer service. I will call you back later. Well, 2 hours later, I was told he's sitting in a bus on his way home. So, of course, he never called until Tuesday. Then I complained because I wanted to speak to his team leader about why he didn't call me back. The team leader was busy in an email. He never replied to me either. So eventually I got an email with a reference number about the subject we talked. Then I sent him an email, what did we talk about, according to that reference number. I didn't get an answer today or yesterday, so I spent 50 minutes today with a call centre representative. What does this reference relate to? Oh, your case is closed. Well, why is that? Well, it's been referred to the environmental officer and you're dealing with him, so the case is closed. Well, how can it be closed? We're still all exposed to the stuff. So I explained to her about the side effects and da-da-da-da. Oh, I have to go back to my team leader. So they went backwards and forwards 3 or 4 times. So 48 minutes later, I got given a reference number because a new complaint had to be lodged about the complaint about previously. So I just keep calling and I just keep harassing them until I eventually get a reference number.
Good on you.
Before you leave, and you've been a very gracious audience and you've been subjected to a great amount of information. It's going to take a while to digest it. One of the best things you can do is have a good sleep tonight, preferably with the power turned off. And in the morning, think about the people you love and the ones who really need to know the essence of what you've heard tonight, because that's how the change happens, person to person, one person at a time, then one community at a time. And I want to say very positively, there is a turning tide, and we're getting information from different communities throughout New Zealand dealing with the same issues, cell towers propped in front of their homes, children with all sorts of unpleasant behaviors. And we're saying to people, this is the time to push back. This is the time to learn more about the technology, which we've helped you do tonight and which our website will do for you, and to join together with kindred spirits to begin making a change. It's going to happen because of us, not because of a government or a regulator or a corporation. They're stuck. They're stuck in their way. We're doing something different, and that's why we want to talk to you and listen to you and listen to each other. Listen to each other's concerns, heart to heart, and then start a small group. Get onto our database. We'll keep you in touch with what we're doing, and that sign-up sheet is in the back on the table, and that display you see is something we created for marketplaces. So you can actually get your phone tested by a meter, and you can see on a map where your home is located in relation to a cell tower, and you can fill out the questionnaire, which will soon be on our website, which will indicate to you whether you have symptoms that are being caused by this radiation. So we're taking the steps. We love your suggestions. We want more. And if you'd like to come to one of our meetings, talk to any one of us, we would welcome you, even for one brief half hour. Just come and be with us. One more question over here.
It seems to be that with teenagers, young people, they need to have this pocket thing with the cell phone. It has to be down here in a pocket or in the back pocket, and it's very cool, and everybody has to be their phone in their pocket. What sort of damage is that doing to their reproductive systems and their hearts and all the rest of it? I challenged my granddaughter the other week when she was at my place, and my ex-husband said, "Oh, what a load of rubbish." And I thought, "Oh, stand with me," but no, it wasn't. But with our national government now taking cell phones out of the school during the school hours, they have to put them somewhere in the room away from the kids. So they are trying to be a little bit proactive. So now's the time to strike, to to push through more on that subject.
Yes, and
They're vulnerable in a way because they've set the climate. Years ago, I had vitamin C intravenously, and the guy that often sat beside me, he had a brain tumour removed from his ear, from inside his ear. And I said, how on earth do you reckon you got that? And he said, I was on my cell phone all the time. He was an architect down in Devonport, and he was given 4 weeks to live after the surgery. He lasted a year and then he finally died, but gorgeous young guy. And he said that the way he worked around not having to have his cell phone on, he would have it in his car at work, and every hour he'd go and check it, do whatever he had to answer, turn it off and come back. So there is ways around it, and we just have to try and educate, especially young people, because, you know, they have no idea. It should be in the schools literature about cell phone damage, potential damage.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Gentleman here.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, great presentation. Thanks, guys. I'm just wondering if are you aware of the Empower movement with Cal Washington in Canada?
Little? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And the notice of liability process.
Yes.
Yeah. So rather than letters, we should be notifying them lawfully.
We have a gentleman on our team based in Hamilton who's begun that process. It's called NOL, Notice of Liability, and it's taken directly to the CEOs who are responsible. And they're going to try it in Hamilton, and they're going to update us on how we might take it here to Auckland Council. We've already been advised to lay a complaint to Auckland Council for not notifying the public of these hazards, which they are bound to do by the Local Government Act. And there's several other issues that we are pursuing with an RMA planner and legal advisor.
Question?
I just have one final query here before we depart, is that one idea was that, have you approached Voices for Freedom or the PHA? Because those are two growing grassroots organizations, and particularly through the Voices for Freedom, they do have a, quote, third-party opening, and oftentimes is that what I'm saying is you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. There are grassroots groups all over the country, and that could be an avenue with connecting in with Voices for Freedom, for example, that information then could be dispersed to all of their, their regional hubs. So I'm just suggesting that might be a link and connection, and also the PHA is another health-oriented group in New Zealand that's growing and internationally as well. But I'm just thinking is that those groups might be the network and conduits for you.
Thank you. That's great. One of the core members of our group was active as a regional coordinator for VFF, and now she's working for RCR, booking speakers.
Yeah, with
and
Bex, yeah.
PHA, People's Health Alliance, the wonderful gentleman who designed their website for the North Shore, the Northland area, designed our website. We're very proud of it. So we are making those connections, and we're also connecting to the New Zealand doctors speaking on science. We hope to have a display like this one at their annual conference in September.
Great.
So the networking continues, and any other suggestions like that are most welcome.
And lastly was, if people want to financially, if people don't have the time, can they financially donate and support what you're doing, and if so, how?
Every page on our website has a donate button. Thank you for mentioning that. Anyone else? Yes. There you go.
Yeah, just a quick one before we go. I don't know if any of you here have heard of graphite paint, but graphite paint is very good at shielding your buildings from EMF. So I think if we can look into where to source it or how to make it, could be useful.
Paul can tell us.
I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but I was an electropollution consultant and I'm now retired, and I'd like to put a plug in for a guy that I've been helping to get started. He's based in Dairy Flat. His name is Robin Marcroft. He's an electrician by trade, and he is a real up-and-coming electro-pollution consultant. If you want his phone number, see me afterwards. I can give you his phone number. But he actually is stocking shielding paint. I've been to his place. He's got it. It's not a big deal. When I used to import it from Germany, it used to come in as a liquid. It now comes in as a powder that you mix into liquid, and then away you go. But you really need to understand what you're doing if you're going to do shielding. So I would most heartily recommend, if you're going to do that, get an electro-pollution consultant or a building biologist who knows what they're doing to help you, because you could spend an awful lot of time and money and waste it by not doing it correctly.
Great. Yep. We're glad you mentioned Robin, because if you'll go to our website, under the category protections, you'll find Robin and other people in this country who are doing that work, and you can contact them directly through the website.
There's also Shungite.
Yeah, Shungite, of course.
Do you want me to talk about Shungite?
Yeah, okay, this is important. Yeah.
A lot of people think Shungite and all these other miracle things. Somebody else touched on, might have been Robin Kelly, maybe talked about all these things. In the 9 odd years that I was testing, I spent thousands of dollars buying stuff and testing it, looking for the magic bullet. There is no magic bullet. Forget Shungite. Lovely stuff, but not going to help. You can actually buy, like you can buy graphite paint, you can actually buy Shungite paint, and if you cover a wall with it, it'd probably work quite well, because it is a graphene substance. But as far as a personal protection, the levels of intensity or power density that Alexi was showing you here in some of those places are phenomenal. A little something around your neck or some little thing on your phone, there's absolutely no way in the world that's going to protect you. And the thing I used to come across, people would say, look, this is giving me protection. And unfortunately, the psychology of that is that they would then go, oh, I've got this little sticker on my phone, or I've got this piece of Shungite around my neck. I can now, with impunity, go and expose myself to as much as I like. And that's outrageously dangerous. It's much, much better to have a level of fear of this. I mean, I'm quite electrosensitive these days, and it's pretty horrible in this room, I have to tell you.
There's about 12 Wi-Fi sitting in now.
Yeah, it's not pleasant at all to be here. I've struggled to actually stay here till the end, really. But yeah, none of these things will give any level of protection.
Okay, if you're busy, we'll have 2 more questions. And then we'll go this. Yeah. You want to say something? Okay. Right. 1 more question. And that's
I'm sure you're aware, Huntly Common Law Court, they are busy doing an initiative at the moment with researching the whole 5G issue, and they'll be preparing documents to serve on all the councils around the country.
Right. That's the town of Huntly.
It's the Huntly Common Law Court. Jeff Smith is the one that has set that up. There's the Hamilton Common Law Group. They're both tied together, but the court is actually in Huntly. Okay. So there's a lot of work that they're doing on this as well.
Great, thank you for that. Wonderful. Okay, everyone, please stick around. If you don't have to rush off and chat with us, have a look at the display and leave your name and contact info if you'd like to be part of this emerging network. Keep well and stay away from the radiation as much as possible.